Rik van Duijn,
Hi.
welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
So you are you've been quoted as one of the best hackers in the world from our mutual friend, Dennis. So shout out to Dennis and all the fam over at Secure. And you're also the best man in the world to talk about something that I'm getting a lot of questions about lately, and that is building and automating things, security things in the world of Azure.
Yeah. Well, I've been playing with that for like 3 years now, so I feel I do know a lot about it.
Cool. So explain that a little bit. Why are you the best man in the world for those two things?
Well, the best man in the world is a big thing, but so what we've been doing for the past, I feel, 3 years now is we've been building our platform Attic, which is a platform that allows you to connect with Office 365 and Azure AD in order to monitor for security incidents and also harden the tenant. So security configurations, stuff like that. For me, I work on the security side of that. So I've been mostly focusing on all the things that can go wrong within, I don't know, Azure Active Directory, Exchange Online, SharePoint, stuff like that.
Perfect. So basically you've been going through and having to feel the pain of all of making all that work, I guess, correct?
Yeah. So before we started, we were talking amongst each other and we were discussing, okay, what are the requirements for this? Because we feel most security is needlessly expensive and is very, like the services are expensive. There's lots of people involved. So we wanted a couple of things. One, it needs to be automated or guided automation, but as much automation as we can manage. Two, we don't want like credentials. So we don't want to have like credentials for every single tenant we manage. So that introduces quite some challenges because, automating stuff is already hard. And not every API allows you to authenticate to it without regular user credentials. So we had to work around that a lot and identify the various APIs we could achieve our goals with.
Cool. So the rest of this episode is basically you going through some of your hardships. And one of the reasons I would like to have you here, right? Because there's a lot of clients out there that are saying like, can we manage this by ourselves? And the answer is yes. You can, in theory, do all this by yourself. But once you're enlightened to all the hardships you're going to face, then maybe it's a different picture. So I just wanted to kind of try to figure out what some of those hardships are and put them on paper or on the audio cloud.
When we started initially, it all sounded really good. There's lots of different APIs, which is really nice, and there's lots of different stuff you can do. And then later we noticed that not every API is publicly available. Which would require you to build like a custom authentication mechanism too. And there's quite some resources for that, but we'd have to like implement those. And next to this, from what I've seen, because it's obviously easy to just go and fix things yourself, is that configuration tends to change if you work with multiple people, and it's hard to keep something that you do today, to keep that in mind for like from a year from now. So like, what was the reason for this? So those two factors make that quite difficult actually.
Right. So you mentioned in the beginning, you said, by the way, your product, your service, it's known as Attic, correct?
Yes.
Attic, yeah. And you said that there's two parts of that. There's the hardening part, and then there's the continuous monitoring part. If we go into the hardening part, which is definitely something that's relevant for everybody that uses anything of Azure, I guess. Yeah. Why don't you give us an introduction to that and the hardships related to that?
Cool. So what we wanted to do was actually check lots of different configuration options within, for example, Azure AD, and so harden those. So sometimes there's like a sys benchmark, which is available that tells you about all the different things that can go wrong. So what we wanted to do is to actually install or actually to have that automatically enroll that across a tenant. What you'll notice is that part of the actual instructions of the benchmark already describe like, oh, this is how you can do it with like PowerShell or this API you can use. And there's lots of different parts that you need to do manually. So that those we would need to work around. So that's one part of hardening and configuring those tenants. But there's also stuff that's really hard to actually automate. For example, let's say within mnemonic we would introduce an MFA policy because we check the tenant. There's no MFA conditional access policy. To just like across the board say, okay, everybody now needs to do MFA, would probably crash one or two things within your organization. There's a Active Directory sync, or there's like an Exchange sync, or something else running there that would crash and burn because of that change. So in order to automate that, or at least have guided automation, we start looking at the current sign-in logs, and then see which services are currently signing in, or which accounts are signing in without multi-factor authentication. How can we then identify those, give those back to the IT services team and say, hey, you are currently not using MFA. We would strongly advise you to use MFA. These are the like service accounts or admin accounts that are currently not using it. Please identify which ones should be excluded of the MFA policy. So in that case, we chose not to like fully automate the entire thing, but we chose to use automation to make things a bit easier and to speed up the implementation process. And it's the trick is finding the spots where you can. Sometimes initially we used to say like, oh, it's not, it can't be done. There's no automation here to be done. And for this case, I think after thinking for a while, we figured out like, oh, we can at least speed up the process and help get our client to a more secure state quicker. So we can't do it fully automated, but we can at least help them.
Yeah, and if I understood you correctly, you couldn't fully automate it because there were certain services that were dependencies, I guess. So if you were to push that out, then it would crash other parts.
Yeah, so there's always like one or two things that log in and don't support multi-factor authentication. So if you would, anything that runs with that would crash and burn.
And if you were a client trying to do this by yourself, you'd also have to identify those sort of dependencies as well.
Yeah, so what we do is actually help you identify those quicker. Yeah. So we automate that process and give those back to you.
Okay, cool. By the way, you were mentioning the word tenants, right? But one company can have multiple different tenants, correct? It's common to have what's normal?
Well, usually they have like an Office 365 tenant, which is like one part of the deal, and then you'd have the Azure tenants, and you can have multiple of those as well. Usually they distribute across subscriptions instead of having different tenants. And then you couple your Azure subscription with your Azure Active Directory tenant.
And so then Office 365 is basically for internal IT purposes, so that everybody probably needs that. And then the different tenants could also be maybe like per product across the company?
So what you could do, it depends. Like we split up our tenants completely for internal IT and for our services. So on the computer I'm working around right now, the email we've communicated across, that's a separate Office 365 tenant with an Azure AD tenant. There's no automation at all there. We have a separate Azure AD tenant with an Azure subscription added to that that runs our backends. And we also obviously have different one for test and acceptance. But we chose to fully split those up. You could run everything in one. We felt the isolation might add some additional security. However, I mean, if you hack my laptop, there's definitely going to be some connection to the other tenants, obviously, but it's not signed into that tenant.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, the hardening of the tenants, companies want to do that, need to do that to make sure that it's as hard as possible to get into one of those tenants. That's the...
It's part of it. So it's one part is like actual like regular old hardening, making it more difficult to hack a thing. At the same time, you're also improving forensic readiness. So making sure all audit logging is enabled, making sure the audit logging is maybe sent to a Sentinel instance, having like a retention on the data. Which is nice if you have like an incident responder and you only have 7 days of logging versus 90 days, for example. The incident responder will thank you for the added retention, stuff like that. So it's really broad. It goes from disallowing a user to automatically forward all their email to making sure all audit logging is enabled, to checking if legacy authentication is disabled. It's very, very broad.
So the word hardening there is not just making sure it's hard as possible, but it's also making it easier should the shit hit the fan, that you actually have everything you need, right?
I mean, it's going to. So let's make sure we're ready.
Yeah. So that's a nice segue into the other part, the security monitoring aspect of it. So how has that been for you? What is some of the hardships been there?
Well, the biggest hardship there was automatically deploying Sentinel, so Azure Sentinel, and automatically connecting all the different data sources. So it turns out that we have Office 365 and Azure Active Directory logging that we want to get into Sentinel. And we want to actually spin up Sentinel, have resource groups and all that fancy stuff. In order to connect your Exchange and SharePoint and Teams logging to Sentinel, you need to be global admin within the tenant. At the same time, in order to instantiate new resources, like a resource group and like an Azure subscription, you need to have at least contributor rights on a resource group or a subscription. Those are separate permissions, and if we chose to use the delegate admin connection. If you're a cloud solution provider within Microsoft, you can propose to become a delegate admin of a tenant. So what we did was we used that to monitor Exchange, to change stuff like that. However, if you want to instantiate stuff in Azure, like a subscription or resource group or Sentinel, it requires different permissions. So what we had to juggle there is how will we have a hands-off deployment of all of that, while at the same time not having like a regular user that would be a global admin and B, have at least contributor rights on that subscription or resource group. What we ended up with is we have a deployment process where we ask impersonation permissions for Azure, which allows us to instantiate the resource group, deploy Sentinel, deploy all the stuff, and then we use our delegate admin permissions to actually connect the audit logging of Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, stuff like that. And from what I've read online, there's no public tools or scripts or tutorials available currently that allow you to do that automatically. Actually, if you read the Microsoft documentation, there's no supported way. However, if you do like the, what's it called, the browser tools, what's it called, programs for developers, like to inspect all the network traffic, you can actually implement it and call all the correct APIs. So having like a 1 or 2 click, it's actually 2 clicks to be fair, 2 clicks, and then have Azure Sentinel running, get all our rules in there, get the logic apps to actually call our backend with all the alerts and connect all the data. That's been quite some work to get working. And it's currently, it's working, and it's quite cool to see like click, click. It's like 2 approvals, and then whoop, everything just
Everything goes.
yeah, it's really I mean it's automation, so it shouldn't be unexpected or impressive, but to me anything that just like whoop it works, that's always cool.
Right. So for those of us, there might be a bunch of service providers listening to this, wondering like, okay, we'd like to implement that, but for a client trying to do this themselves, trying to just automate the security monitoring of their own environments, tenants. So what kind of challenges are they going to come across that they should have in the back of their head?
Yeah, for me personally, I would deployment. I wouldn't try to automate. If I would just do it for one tenant, if you're like a solution like an MSSP or an MSP, I would definitely look into automating that stuff because it just saves you a lot of time. But if you run one tenant and you need to do stuff, just get the deployment, do it manually, clickety, do all the stuff, and then use some tooling. There's Azure Sentinel, which allows you to at least monitor stuff like are my data sources still connected? Are my analytics rules up to date? Stuff like that. And then focus on that part. And then maybe some additional checks to see if all the audit logging is still coming in. To give you a weird example, recently I had a tenant. Audit logging was enabled. Everything was working, but there was no audit logging coming in. And it took I think a week or 2 weeks and lots of calls with Microsoft. And then they did some diagnostics and they were like, well, we still don't know. And then I noticed, it's working again. And so they didn't really fix it by design, but they just started enabling diagnostic stuff to see what was wrong. And then accidentally it started working again, which was great, but you need to keep in mind that there's a possibility of the stuff just not working.
Yeah, that's because they're changing stuff all the time, which is good, I guess. New features.
Yeah, well, this morning we run, I think it's currently like 70 checks, which most of them have automated fixes. And then there's 2 checks this morning that started failing because they changed the output of one of the APIs. So to fix it, it's not that much work. We just need to expect a different JSON object back. And luckily, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen that for some reason or other, one of our checks starts failing, and then it turns out that Microsoft changed the output because of, well, there's probably very good reasons, but I don't know.
So before we leave Sentinel and security monitoring sort of stuff, is there any challenges that a customer run into in the automation of the security monitoring part of things?
In the automation part, well, building the stuff, it's a lot of work. We've been working on our platform for 3 years now, and the core of it has been working after maybe 3 or 6 months. But keeping up with the different APIs, making sure you can connect to that automatically, having a framework run all the things, that's quite a big job. And at the same time, I feel that keeping track of all the different things that can go wrong is also quite a challenge. To give an obscure example, if you use BitLocker within your organization and your laptops are joined to Office 365 and Azure AD, the BitLocker key is actually stored in the tenant and it's accessible to the user who owns the device. Meaning, you can now log into it's myaccount.microsoft.com and download your own BitLocker key. Cool. Which also means your IT department probably spent some time making sure you can't become a local admin. So if you now take out your disk and you get the key from the account, you can mount the disk on another system. Because you have the key, you can decrypt it, change the local disk, put it back into your laptop, and then you can become local admin.
Local admin.
And up until recently, there wasn't actually any option to disable this. And then all of a sudden I was building something else and then I saw like a flag, like user is allowed to read own BitLocker key or something like that. Is false or is true. And I was like, false. And then nothing happened. And then months later, they launched a public preview where you are actually able to modify that setting. That setting is not in any portal. There's no way to click it. You need to actually call Graph API to modify it. And you need to keep track of all of that stuff. And that's pretty difficult.
Right. Sounds like you got to hack a lot of stuff to make it all work, I guess, at the end of the day.
Well, that's the fun part. I mean,
yeah, for you, I guess.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's frustrating as well. There's stuff we just cannot change because of an API I can't call because there's some legacy stuff or some weirdness. So then it's very frustrating, but it's also a lot of fun. And because it changes a lot, it makes it interesting because then I see like a different option or they launch a preview and they change stuff. I mean, you can definitely see they're working hard to improve things in that area. Yeah,
and that's good. We like that.
Definitely.
So, if you look away from some of those specific features or, small quirks here and there, are there any more like overarching challenges that a client will face when that you can think of besides, Microsoft changes their APIs? Just overall things that are going to make it difficult that they need to have in the back of their head before they decide that, okay, we're going to do this ourselves, as opposed to getting help from you or some other third party.
Well, the main part would be that they would have to have somebody that knows all of the quirks and all of the things. You could definitely just look at the sys benchmark and then you are there for quite of the way. Keep in mind that sometimes implementing one of those benchmarks does mean that stuff stops working. So, for example, you can say like, I'll disable legacy authentication. But if you have like a printer from 1945, it might not support modern authentication.
Right.
Make sure that to not just follow the guides blindly. Think about what it is you're attempting to change. Maybe see if you can determine impact beforehand and at least know if you can roll back. Because, it would be not so nice if stuff stops working.
Right. So do you have any other... it sounds like you need to have either an Azure Ninja internally, or maybe 2 or 3, just in case that one is going to be sick or whatever, have kids. Is there any... or you just need to have somebody to hold your hand throughout the process, I guess.
Definitely. Well, there's lots of consultants. You could definitely hire those. There's some tooling available as well. There's guides, and there's obviously Attic, which can also help you identify different pain points within your Office 365 or Azure Active Directory environment.
And just to go back to this, I know we've already covered it, but I just want to say it again. If you don't have something like Attic, what is the workload on your own people then at that point to do the things that Attic is striving to do?
Well, it depends. You could, if you would just have people change settings one time and then forget, then I feel that it could be like a task of an admin for like a couple of days and then it's done. However, keeping up with the different changes, new features, new risks, making sure that that configuration you set, your colleague doesn't unset it. So then it will require like somebody, like a part of their week for one human at least, if not more, depending on the size of your tenant. It would require quite some effort. Main part being keeping up with all the different new stuff.
Right. Yeah. And it's kind of like inefficient to have one person doing that for one organization, I guess.
I feel perhaps. It does. Our platform is like fully automated, looks at the stuff constantly, and alerts you the moment there's something that requires attention. So that would then it's like an addition, and it can help your current sysadmin just improve stuff instead of him having to look for the things he might possibly improve without beforehand knowing what he's looking for.
Right.
Yeah.
when it comes to companies trying to build their own security operations, right? You mentioned Sentinel. And I know that Sentinel comes out of the box with a bunch of rules and everything, but I would assume, knowing where I work, that those rules aren't, they're not like covering everything, right? And maybe they're good enough, maybe they're not good enough, but like, do you have any advice, in general advice for companies that are trying to make their SOC work from Sentinel?
Well, yeah, if you use Sentinel, the built-in rules are actually not that bad. I feel they're quite nice. You might have some cases where there's some specific stuff to your organization that's nice. So there's a marketplace that also allows you to buy new rules from different vendors, which is also nice to have as an addition. So what we've done is we've expanded on the current rule set, and we just deploy those in our within our clients. But I feel that, let's say you're starting off, just start adding rules cautiously, one by one, or maybe a couple. See how many times those trigger, and if they trigger too much, you're probably not. Well, you could be hacked, but there's probably a bigger chance of the rule not being efficient. So in that case, I would advise caution, and not to just say, okay, more alerts is more better, but to be like, okay, I want very few alerts, but if there's an alert, I want
high fidelity alerts.
Yeah, definitely. And then maybe there's all kinds of hunting stuff that's very noisy. That's all fine. So that can kick in the moment the high fidelity alerts go off. But don't go chasing everything. You'll have sad SOC employees. You'll have bad alerts, and it just costs way too much time.
So last group of questions for you. This is for, I guess, a sales pitch for both me and you, I guess. But like, let's not make it a sales pitch. But, what are the benefits that a client can, should expect from a third party when helping with these sort of things? I heard mentioned over and over again, but like keeping up with all the changes, we as third parties maybe
obviously
can do that more efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, I feel most organizations don't need to run their own SOC. They might want to have like an MSSP that works together with their IT services provider. That's always nice. It's just there's more people that are focused on security in those provider roles, and if they have built their services correctly, you can, if they gain knowledge, they could apply that knowledge across the board pretty quickly. At least that's how we've built our platform, and I feel you guys have also worked very hard to make sure that the moment you figure something out, you can then apply that across like different clients at the same time without manually doing stuff. So it's more efficient. It's hard and it's expensive to get people that know security. It's hard. It's even harder keeping them, especially if you drown them in bad tooling or bad alerts or lots of meetings, I feel. So in that case, it will be way more efficient for most companies to have an external provider to help them than to run their own. There's obviously exceptions. There's very big corporations. There's government agencies that have different requirements. Or maybe your organization has like a very specific threat profile, which requires you to do this. But otherwise, get a service provider and don't try to do like top of the line APT, like foreign government anti-hacking stuff. Just like have decent security, because the neighbors won't. And then you start talking about security waterline, and as long as yours is like a tiny bit higher, there's a very big chance they'll go to the neighbor, and you won't get bothered, which is a cynical view of security, but it works.
It's not the first time I've heard it.
Oh, that's good.
So last question for you. Is there anything, like if me and you were, let's say we're getting attacked on stage somewhere, right, by a bunch of clients, and we understand their viewpoint, right? They always have good points. Is there anything that a client does that makes your life harder and that you would, I'm going to buy Attic, but before I buy Attic, there's a few things you would like for me not to avoid doing to make me both get the benefit of your service, but to not, kill you guys on the other end?
Well, I mean, what I hate and love is the tenants that have like all the weird stuff and have like many different exceptions to everything, because that's hard to automate. At the same time, it's a nice challenge. So I would say that's one of the things. And at the same time, like our tool helps you. It alerts you. It says like, hey, you need to fix this. Click here to fix it, or fix it yourself. Here's the instruction. But if you just like maybe not do anything, then you don't get the benefit of the tooling. Yeah, it's the same if you guys call and it's like there's something happening right now. You need to look at this system, or we need to move. We need to do set up instant response. Blah blah blah. It's like nah. Let's start Monday. It's Friday now. I mean, you won't get the full benefit of your services.
Right.
So listen to the expert, I feel.
Listen to the experts. So before we round off today, are there any, special use cases you've been hearing or receiving from your clients lately that you, that are easier, that are like your platform or, a third party can easily address, like business email compromise or ransomware, or I don't know, just some examples.
Obviously. Well, from our perspective, we obviously look a lot at Office 365. So business email compromise is one of the main things we see stuff around, where either a account gets hacked because, password gets leaked, there's no MFA, or because of the MFA push spamming, they just spam the user until they say, like, okay, it's probably useful, and accept, and then get logged in. Uber, we had it same with our tax authority. Our tax authority got hacked the same way. Luckily, like it was a responsible disclosure thing, so Uber wasn't as lucky. However, for us, what we see is that they make like mail rules where they hide the email within like archive or RSS feed, mark as read. So what we've done is we obviously help you harden the MFA stuff, enforce MFA, and at the same time we use Sentinel to automatically detect like weird mailbox rules or weird forwarding rules within the tenant on the exchange level as well as on the user level. And we're introducing, I feel later this year or the start of the next year, we're introducing remediations. So currently we do checks and fixes for configuration stuff, and we have rules. So a new mailbox rule would be something that triggers, gives you an alert, and remediations are fixes for rules. So, for example, you would get a notification saying, hey, Robby just is now forwarding all his email to evilhacker@gmail.com. Currently, that's the alert you get. And then you can respond to us like, not good, help. We're pushing out remediations later where you can actually say, not good, please lock out the user, or please remove the email rule. And that automatically removes the rule, locks out the user, forces password change. Depending on the rule, we have certain remediations, and we can automate the entire process. So we're still working on that part.
My last question to you. Why, it sounds like you're just trying to, why doesn't Microsoft just do this for us? Why do we have a role in all this?
Well, they do. They have built all the tooling there. So what Attic does is actually what we do personally is know about all the different configuration, all the different tools you can use, but there's so much. So what we do is we help you automate and use this efficiently. So Microsoft already does, but they don't make choices for you, because if they start like enforcing MFA across all tenants, we'd probably have they would probably have an interesting day, and all users would also have an interesting day. There's going to be a bad time, so it requires a bit of more nuance. It requires a bit more attention, which as a big cloud provider is hard to deliver. So they've always had a strategy where they supply like licensing, all the tools, the configuration stuff, and then they have partners that usually manually manage stuff for you. What we decided to do is we decided to say like, okay, cool, that's not affordable to most clients. Let's just see if we can automate 80% of it, do 20% of that by hand, and have like an affordable service that allows anybody to have a secure environment.
I think that's a great place to leave this out, Rik.
Cool. Nice.
Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, man.
Rik.
Bye.
Ciao.